Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have 15 minutes until 12 o'clock, according to my Spiro Agnew wristwatch, which probably isn't working, as apparently Spiro isn't working hard enough. What we'd like to do with that is to throw it open generally to a very informal panel discussion with these journalists and discuss a number of things that are bothering us, perhaps are bothering you. We do have a problem in that we don't have enough microphones on our table, so we're going to have to be shifting back and forth to those microphones, and it will be a little awkward for the gentlemen present, but we're going to do our best to overcome that by making do. I'd like to open it, Hilaire, if you don't mind. I wonder if you'd begin by commenting on what these Pentagon papers mean. Was there anything in them that you hadn't revealed 10 years ago?
Can all of you hear me out there? I'm awfully grateful to have a chance to say something, because sitting here at one of Scott's sessions as a captive auditor with a gag over his mouth is awfully painful. When I hear Scott say something, try to make a plea for sympathy by telling you about the responsibility he has in the care and feeding of so many writers. I want to tell you, as regards the feeding, it is pretty slim pickings. Gary Allen told you that Lee Clark lost 164 pounds working so hard for Scott. She lost it living on Scott's pay. I'm going in for this New York Times campaign for the public right to know, is why I tell you this. When George Schuyler and I talk about Scott Stanley, we never use his name. We refer to him by his code name, Simon Degree. So I'm awfully happy to have him give me a chance to give you a comment on these papers. Now, I don't want to give you too much, because my July H2B report is going to be exactly on those papers. Most of you know that I put out this report. I think of myself as your political guru, sitting under the olive trees on the Riviera and trying to amass this material for you. It's awfully interesting, these papers, because I want to point out something to you that you may not have thought about. You see, this is part of a 1, 2, 3 punch, as a follow-up punch. There are going to be many more punches. The first was My Lai, and then came your attack on the FBI. And now at this drive, at the moment when there is a powerful drive to get the United States to announce a definite date at which they will pull out of Vietnam, regardless of what happens between now and then, or what is certain to happen after then, why this thing comes out. This is part of the frontal attack on the government to make you rise up, the public of America, and add your voices to that demand that we rise out, that we put out. Now, how many of you people, when you read that first installment in the New York Times on this thing, noticed that also on the front page was a story which brought in Senator McCarthy, Senator McCluskey, and also Averell Harriman, saying that 30 days after we pull out, all American prisoners will be released. See, this is just another punch. So that this drive was to be supported by the revelations which they purported to be giving you folks. And how ridiculous this is. Has anybody stood up and said, how about Sergeant George Harold Bennett? Will he be released? He was the prisoner from Perryville, Arkansas, whom the Hanoi government took out and simply shot in 1965 for no reason, no charge against him, to show America that they could shoot any prisoner they wanted to, and you couldn't do anything about it. He's never been mentioned since. However, his senator from his constituency, Senator Fulbright, suggested that we send a delegate to Ho Chi Minh's funeral. We'll see. Now, these two things are tied up together. I wonder how many people who read these revelations, so-called revelations in the New York Times, realized that you were not being given the report that was prepared for the Pentagon, but you were given the New York Times report on them. A report which was edited, rewritten, and which selected passages where there were quotes were brought out to be put before you. Wonder how many people, all America, who read that thing, were astute enough to pick up that one line which stated that these men, the 38 men who prepared the report, did not have access to all the documentation they wanted. They had to ask for what they wanted. How many of those men knew enough about Vietnam to know what to ask for? Now you have this man Ellsberg, who was out there for a short time in 1964 and 1965, working with General Lansdale. Well, General Lansdale is our evil genius of the whole thing. How many Americans know that he was expelled from Indochina in 1951 by Marshal de Lattre de Tassigny? Because de Lattre de Tassigny felt that he was building up a force there to work out an accord, an entente with Red China. His Majesty Baudai was talking to me about Lansdale one day. He said, you know, I saved his life. They wanted to assassinate him, and I prevented it. And I said, Your Majesty, you were remiss in your obligations to your country as an emperor. He said, you know where I first saw Lansdale? And I said, no, Your Majesty, I've often wondered, because here in the United States, we have been given very, very little about that man's early background. The emperor said, well, I met him with Ho Chi Minh. I was a prisoner, and he was there by choice. And this is the man who trained Ellsberg, who Ellsberg worked with for a short period during the short time, and the only time Ellsberg was in Vietnam. So then, this leads us on to another aspect. Did you people notice when you read as much as you've been given of this thing, that they only had access to files dating from 1961? That all records previous to 1961 had been lost or mislaid. That was a direct quote. You know what that means? It was prior to 1961 that General Lansdale, then Colonel Lansdale, was making a hollow shell out of Vietnam, destroying and crushing every anti-communist force in the country. So somehow or other, all of those things disappeared when this report was made. And yet we are told openly that this was, the reason of this report was to provide future historians with the material that they will need. They told you in that report that our involvement started under Truman when we were supporting the French. Day before yesterday, a story here in Boston was published telling you how often Ho Chi Minh asked for aid and we refused to give it to him. I wish somebody had been in Boston with access to radio, TV, or the press, able to stand up and say, talk sense. 4 years after OSS set Ho Chi Minh up in business, OSS officers were setting up meetings here in America for the Vietnam American Friendship Association, which was Ho Chi Minh's lobby. In 1949, His Majesty Baudai sent Dr. Nguyen Van Daan over to Washington as his personal agent to try to plead with our State Department, to say with us to them, for heaven's sakes, quit playing a double game. While you are pretending to be strengthening the French and giving them a little bit of material, under the table, you are helping Ho Chi Minh all the time. Can't you see that that man is a communist? That he was present in 1920 at the big meeting the day before Christmas in France in which the Communist Party was formed, was one of its first members, immediately went to Moscow for training? This man has always been a communist. Well, Dr. Mandan came over to Washington. He was shifted into the Southeast Asia section of the State Department, found himself sitting across the table from a man named Shaughnessy. I don't know where Shaughnessy is now. I've always wanted to trace him down. Dr. Don told me, I delivered His Majesty's message to Shaughnessy, told him that Ho Chi Minh was a communist. Shaughnessy laughed in my face and said, that man is a nationalist, a true nationalist, and he is the one who deserves our support. You see. And these are all the things that are being hidden from you in that Pentagon paper. So what you have there is a report created, drawn up by 36 men for the Pentagon, but 36 men who had access to the files they asked for, providing those files didn't go back further than 1961. Isn't that shocking?
Which is about as keen an analysis as anyone is likely to get until they get to that new H2B report.
I take it that this is my cue to go off the air. Thank you.